is this, like 6 to 8? That's like prime time to go get some dinner. So thank you all for being here. And thank you all for 27th Letter for having us and having Ian's work and having this talk right now. So we appreciate you all hosting. So my name's Heather, and I'll be kind of like facilitating this conversation, but I'm just opening up questions for Ian to just talk, really. Just so you all know, we met last week and had lunch and like had a full discussion about like what we wanted to chat about. So if some of this seems scripted, it's because it kind of is. The questions are, at least I told Ian what I was going to ask, so he could come prepared. Otherwise, we're just going off the cuff. So thanks all for being here. So instead of me rolling off your accomplishments, Ian, I wanted to just I know I come from like a traditional kind of like academic art background where a lot of people just like, you've done this, you've been here, you've done that. So instead I wanted you to share what you wanted to share with everyone else tonight, like your own accomplishments in the way that you see.
Sure. Okay. Hey everybody, thanks for coming. It's really sweet of you. I will reiterate the thanks to 27th Letter and to Heather and to MJ for filming. And yeah, no, I think like accomplishments is a big word for having like just made it through parts of life. But just a little bit of like background stuff. Like, yeah, I went to school at U of M Ann Arbor. Go Blue! It's like the first time I've said that ever. But went to the art program there and the political science department because I couldn't decide and was very angry and still wanted to paint things. Read a lot of Karl Marx, painted a lot. That was a good 5 years. And then afterwards I moved to Detroit in part because I kind of I'm gonna have to take this off, I can't see. In part because I, over the course of college, had gotten a lot more committed to being from Michigan, essentially. Like, I'd grown up here. I was really, initially, like, Michigan is nothing but conservative. I grew up in West Michigan, which is very conservative, very white, very set in its ways, I think is the nice way of saying that. And I was ready to go initially. But I stayed in Michigan, and then over the course of being here, I developed this deep connection in a way, some of it from like doing organizing work here, some of it from traveling. I went to Cuba at one point, and Cuba is a pretty amazing place, but I found myself while I was in Cuba thinking, this isn't my home. This is not my dirt. This is their space. This is their space to fight for. I can support them, but I need to go back to the dumb hills of Michigan that I love. And that's how I thought of it. And there aren't even that many hills here, but yeah, I kind of recommitted myself to being in Michigan as I kind of ended school, and I helped found, and now I've been a part of, the Brick and Mortar Collective it'll be 10 years in April, so it's 9 and a half.
Wow, I didn't realize it was 10 years.
I'm older than I look sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a group equity housing co-op, pretty standard, like everyone, instead of paying paying security deposit, you buy into the org and help run it democratically. And then I was a part of founding and for a time running the Michigan Student Power First Network, and then Alliance and Network, and now just Alliance, with some wonderful people who are also here today and featured in some of the paintings. Monica, Soraya, and Aiko are all here and good comrades from that struggle. And yeah, I mean, those are, I think, the two biggest like accomplishments. They aren't particularly artistic. They are involved in, I think, struggle and trying to improve the place that I'm from and the place that I call home. And I guess the part that I was left unsaid there is I moved to Detroit because I think this is the place where Michigan's future is being decided. I think if Detroit becomes Ann Arbor, then Michigan becomes a centrist Dem state at best and a Republican state very likely, just because Detroit is what keeps Michigan voting blue. It keeps Michigan on what I would say is a better path for history. And so if I was going to stay in Michigan, I wanted to be a part of fighting for the most strategic place in our state. Artistically, accomplishments I should probably mention. I've had this show. That's cool. I also just did a show in New York with the People's Forum. When you say you're doing a show in New York, people are like, oh my goodness, you're such an artist. And it's a little bit more, I'm such a communist, because that was, I think, a little bit more the criteria at a certain point. But they're an amazing space. They're on my little shout out list here, basically trying to do internationalist, socialist education across boundaries and basically educating folks in our country about the struggle happening in the developing world. And so it was a real honor to be, I was part of their first exhibition there that was like about art, not just about like agitprop or something, which they've had a lot of good work there, but just that was a great honor with an artist named Rivka from Oakland currently, I believe. Yeah.
And that was this past summer, correct?
Yeah, or that was this past, I should know the date, it should be burned in my brain, but like February.
Oh, okay, it was earlier in the year. I'm curious, because you talked a little bit about like reading Marx, studying art at the same time. I'm curious like how your artistic and political development and like where they started and where they're at now and like how we got to that point.
Yeah. So I grew up in a progressive household. My parents were very supportive, like left Dems. I was taught at a young age what the McCarthy hearings were. I don't entirely know how we got on that subject, but it was like before Saturday morning cartoons. I remember having explained like what McCarthyism was. And then I sat through the first part of the George Bush administration and was like, this seems like the worst person ever. Like I was learning about imperialism in like 8th grade and then I'm like watching it happen in Iraq. And I was like, I feel like that's what we're doing. And the news was like, oh no, it's very different. But I got very, very frustrated with that and that was like what my country was this sort of imperial, like increasingly openly racist, like it seemed like every day being more explicit about what it was and what it was going to do to other people in the world. And then the Dems came through with John Kerry, who was a nice plank of wood to run against one of the worst people in history, and basically said they would do the empire better. And so in freshman year of high school, when we spent a whole day on the Russian Revolution, my 20th century history class, I was like, well, that's it. That's the answer, like many freshmen do. And about a month later, I read the Communist Manifesto. And well, half of it, I read half of it. The second half gets a bit long. It's like a whole 10 pages. And I was like, no, that's it. And so then I started calling myself a communist in my freshman year of high school. And then, of course, I kept reading because there was no material struggle for me to engage with, at least none that I was engaged with as a 15-year-old. And I was like, oh, well, there might be some problems with the USSR. I must become an anarchist. And so then I started calling myself an anarchist. I think that's a pretty common high school trajectory. Got into punk a bit, and then throughout all this time I always made time for art. I was very invested in making art. I mean, it started for me just like drawing Lord of the Rings fan art, to be honest. Like I got the Lord of the Rings art books, and so I got really into that. I drew World War II aircraft, which is a weird initial part of my trajectory.
I'm curious to see how you bring that back.
It doesn't. It kind of dead ends there. It hasn't really circled back in.
Not yet.
But, and then I'd always made time for art in high school, and then when it came time to go to college, it was the collapse of the banking system in 2008 and 9. All the financial aid money dried up, and my parents were like solidly middle class, but weren't like so solidly middle class that $250,000 of out-of-state tuition was just going to come out of their pocket. So I applied all around, and basically I could either go deeply into debt or go with some scholarships pretty much very cheaply to Michigan. And thank God, didn't go deeply into debt and stayed in Michigan, which has changed a lot of my life. But at the time I was only going to study political science, and I was going to U of M, and I was kind of frustrated and sad. And I was like, God damn it, I'm going to go to art school too. And so I just
to be even more frustrated and sad. That's all I think about.
Little did I know.
Yeah.
But I messaged I was like way late for the application and everything. I just messaged them and was like, hey, can I apply late? Here's like my portfolio. I totally understand. Like if I could start in December, that'd be great. And they're like, okay, well, can you write this essay? I sent it in. They're like, yeah, you're in. So I don't get the impression the stamp school was particularly discerning that year. I think they might have been below their quota. But yeah, so I mean, that was kind of I went to college, an anarchist, like drawer, painter person. And then in college, I did some organizing. I joined a socialist group, it fell apart. Joined another socialist group, it fell apart. The third one kind of stuck together. And then I was in the local Occupy Wall Street demonstration group. I actually ended up being in New York doing some Palestine solidarity work, but also I was there when Occupy Wall Street considered taking another square. And they were talking about expanding the occupation. Would have been a pretty big thing, but the crowd actually talked itself out of it over the course of like 3 hours of massive democratic discussion that resulted in nothing happening, and then about a bunch of people going home. But yeah, Occupy Wall Street, like some people, it really made them anarchists. For me, it really taught me the limits of having 1,000 meetings and everybody going home sad and tired and not being able to be like, we're just going to make a decision now. And so that kind of started to I saw some of the limitations around that sort of like totally decentralized, destructuralized ideology, and that kind of pushed me back towards Mr. Len over there, which I kind of joke is like I spent a bunch of my adult life being like, well, I don't want to become a Leninist, and then like, well, he's fucking right though, so I gotta circle back in there at some point. And so yeah, I mean, that's like basically through organizing and being involved in more practical organizing. I was involved with Unite Here a little bit. I was did Occupy Wall Street stuff. I was involved in some student union stuff, and then out of that joined the Power Network. But like the practical organizing is really what steered me back towards the like more communistic politics as opposed to anarchist or liberal. And I mean, the art side of things, I was dissuaded kind of frequently in the path I was taking. Folks were kind of like, why are you painting if you're a leftist? Like, that's kind of a bourgeois medium, isn't it? Or like, why are you doing figurative painting? That's sort of like, at the time, it's much more popular now, but at the time, like, that's kind of a dead art form of like, we did that, it's over, we've painted all the people we need to paint in history, and we're moving forward with color shapes, which, not to say the color shapes are bad, I'm just saying that I think there's still some people to paint. And so that was sort of like, there was some skepticism around the politics, some skepticism around the choice of figuration, and it wasn't like a strong figurative school, so I was just sort of like obsessively taking the like figure class, the painting class over and over again. And so there's sort of like, you can kind of see some of the books I was reading throughout college by the people I ended up painting shortly thereafter. There was sort of like this echo that went back and forth. But it's only really since college that I've started to more intentionally combine those two parts of my life, as opposed to just kind of like, yeah, that's the class I'm taking over there, the class I'm taking over there.
I'm curious because you keep referencing the people we're surrounded by in the paintings, and I wanted to get back to the title of this whole exhibition called Comrades.
Mm-hmm.
And we had talked about, I brought up the book by Jody Dean called Comrades, and I had referenced it because I had read it last year, or the year before, I think last year. And you had critiques about the book, which I totally get, and what I got away from got from the book was the fact that it was kind of like motivating in a way, where just the idea of like camaraderie, like what that is and within history. And so the three kind of points that Jody Dean brought up when using the term comrade that I found most powerful was that it's egalitarian, meaning there's no kind of like gender binary to the term, and it denotes a political expectation between people, and so people have an accountability to one another, and the fact that you're not born a comrade, right? Like, it's a form of belonging that you choose. And so with this exhibition called Comrade, we have some people around us who you've never met before, but you probably feel like through their writing, and then you have people who are still here with us that you have close relationships with. And so I wanted you to talk about how this umbrella of comrade, how you see that term, and how you and share some stories of the people that we might not know who you have decided to paint.
I could talk for quite a while, I guess.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that for me, the reason I chose the name Comrades, and the reason why I think that like socialist ideology and socialist thought plays such a core role in my life is I see it as a potentially very redemptive space for humanity at a time when history seems sort of played out and at an end. There's this sort of sense of like with ecological collapse, with the kind of end of possibility that the 90s and 80s sort of preached, like there is no alternative to what is, even if what is horrible. I see socialism as this like call to all of us to like join something bigger than ourselves again, to be a part of building that better world. That better world isn't based on like, it isn't based on like profit, it's not based on like some like being that we can't understand, it's based on each other. It's based on the idea that we all have needs and that we are fully capable of meeting each other's needs and engaging in that struggle. And I see the word comrade in like this kind of overarching historical sense as like, yeah, like these are all my comrades. These are people that I've struggled alongside of, that struggled before me, that struggled before all of us. That there are people potentially here, depending on how long some of us live, that will be struggling after us. And I think that that's like this, for me, that's been like a very freeing notion. This sort of sense of like, I don't have to solve the world's problems. I don't have to be the perfect human being. I don't have to like exercise 17 times a day and eat right and like interact with people in exactly the right way. And like the world's changed by all of us connecting and building together. And so like, that's what I hope with a lot of my work kind of like, I tries to connect with people, is a sense of like, you are more than yourself. You are part of something bigger than yourself. And all you have to do is sort of like, join, opt in. There's stuff all around us that we can be a part of, and that we can even in small ways, but also in very large ways, struggle for that better world together. And I think so many of the ways that we're taught to identify or that we're taught to act politically are so individualized. They're very consumptive. There's sort of this idea of like, yeah, like being the activist, which I think is sort of sometimes a very individual identity, is like you are the person who gets it and tells other people what to do, as opposed to like, I would say a comrade connects with other people and tries to find that path forward together, and really sees that as a shared duty. And I think there's also a piece in there that my partner and I talk about a lot, is that a comrade isn't necessarily a friend. I think sometimes in the left and in movements in general, we want everyone to be friends, and we need everyone to be friends, and it's great when we're friends. But everyone in the world isn't going to be friends, but everyone in the world should have food, and should have healthcare, and should have a house. And so I think that like, what Comrade opens, as an idea, opens up space for is this idea that like, I don't even have to like you. I think you deserve this, and I think you and I can get free together. And I think that's really what it comes down to, and why it's a different term than friend or neighbor or like brother or sister, which are obviously more gendered. Is that, yeah, it's this sort of like idea of like, it frees us from that necessity of also like performing for each other. We should have friends, and we should also have comrades, and there's going to be a Venn diagram there, but we shouldn't try to push all of our friends into being comrades and push all our comrades into being friends. We should just understand that, yeah, some of us are struggling towards that future together.
And can you share a story or two?
Good, yeah. That's why I'm not just talking about myself. Yeah, I think like I think just since everyone's facing this direction, I'm gonna focus on these. And I'll do these two here. The center one the upper center is a Carl Yaneda. Can anybody who knows who Carl Yaneda is before you read the description, if you knew who he was, raise your hand. I know at least one of you's lying, but it's okay. So yeah, Carl Yaneda was a Japanese-American communist organizer. My partner like just basically said, you should read this book, and without a lot of context, handed me his autobiography. And it's incredible, like just the amount of history that he shared there around Asian-American left-wing organizing, union organizing, up and down the coast, inside of the party, outside of the party. That just I'd never, as somebody who'd been reading lefty books for a while, much less reading mainstream history, had just been totally left out. He was also like somebody who lifted up. Oh no, I'm gonna forget the name because I'm stressed. I'm not gonna get it, but there's a Japanese American. Sen Katayama, thank you so much, who helped found the Communist Party here, and was also sort of being left behind by the history. And so actually Carl was one of the ones who went back, dug up that history, shared it amongst the party, and made sure that figure still had his recognition within organizing. But after, he basically did tons of organizing on the coast. When World War II came, the Communist Party backed the war because the war was supporting the USSR and the struggle against fascism. That was kind of their line. And that meant that initially they supported internment. And so that was a huge contradiction that he had to struggle with and deal with. And just, I think as somebody who he had his problems with it, obviously. And he struggled to make sure that the camps were as just and egalitarian as possible amongst the people who were there. But he's also somebody who volunteered to fight when they asked for volunteers, which is I don't think something maybe I would have done, because he saw that broader picture of we're fighting fascism, and he seems in his writing seems to find a direct responsibility being having Japanese heritage to combat Japanese fascism, as well as the broader historical struggle that the party was involved in, that the whole world was involved in against fascism at the time. And just, I think he's a great example of somebody who's had an individual life, lived a life, had a great love affair, had children, had at one point he raises chickens on a farm, steps in and out of the movement at different times, but lives his life of devoted, complete struggle at various points. And that's in part made possible by collective organizing, as well as, and that held him together through that incredibly difficult time. Something I don't know if I would have had the strength to do without that sort of structure and that fortitude. And so part of the goal with some of this is just go look this guy up, read about him, learn about him, incredible American. There's so many folks that when you read history and actually read it, there's people that, how are we getting movies about Captain America every other year, but actual amazing people in American history, a cinematic life at every level, and just gets totally left out. And then for some folks who are still local comrades, we have Sam and Kay just behind me. This is the most recently finished piece. They're some of the organizers that first greeted me when I moved to Detroit. They were excited. They sat down with me. I was kind of weirded out by how excited they were, because they were so nice. And I was I'm just this guy though. I'm an out. They were just no, but you're I don't know. My experience is that elders can be so much more giving sometimes than our younger comrades, our peers. The elders are just thank God. Get in the door. We need all the help we can get. And so they were incredibly welcoming and put me on the right course in some ways, introduced me to other folks. And so I was reflecting on the ideas for this show, the ideas for my work in general, and I approached them and asked if they'd be willing to do a portrait. And so, whereas with Carl, I had to do a little bit more of just using a reference, a Dorothy Lang photo, who's an amazing photographer, but with this one, I was able to construct it with them, and so we talked about Kay's father, who fought in Spain, was a member of the party all through her life. We talked about Sam's father, who was a union man all his life. Sam moving out here and helping kind of lead the connection of Appalachian white folks who moved to the city in with organizing and multiracial organizing that was happening in the city. These are folks who struggled alongside General Baker and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, and just have they again have a whole life, beautiful family, deep connections to their parents and to their all the way down to their grandchildren, and they were surprised. I'm always surprised that people are surprised that they're very cool. And also I'm very nervous to ask people if they want to be painted, because it feels like a big ask for me, but then they're often very excited because it's, I guess, it would be nice, right? Like, often is. But yeah, I mean, to get in, I guess, in a little bit to the process with them, I basically I'm formalizing it a little bit more, but I sent them like a whole Google Doc with like, what part of your life, what are some important parts of your life, what are like some important struggles you're involved with, ideas that have really influenced you, moments that have been impactful, and then sat down with them and we kind of talked through how to kind of translate some of that into a painting. Sometimes folks are like I really love this book, so I'd like to have me holding it. And sometimes it's a little Vanna White, you know, like you're holding, and like it's like, well, maybe we have that like on the side, you know, or like maybe if that's the point of the painting, we build a whole painting around the reading group. And so like we sat down and talked through kind of how to do it. This is reference image was in their living room. In the background are images of Kay's father wearing his, it's kind of hard to see because it's very small, but wearing his internationalist brigade hat. And then I'm going to forget whether I believe it's Sam's father or grandfather in the upper right, one of those many men in that gray photo. But then, yeah, they picked their wardrobe. Sam had always sung a lot at demonstrations or at the end of meetings to kind of hold people together and bring people together. So we wanted to incorporate that. We compromised on the dog because I don't like making paintings about animals sometimes. Because when you put a dog in a painting, everyone goes like, the dog! Yeah. And it's then a dog painting. And it's still there. Like it's incorporated without dominating. Yeah, and then that was taken in their living room, kind of the sense of it being at the core of their lives. That sign that the name of the painting, When We All Do Better, comes from is just sitting over their couch right there. So sometimes it seems really intentional when it's just like that's how people are living their lives. I think also sometimes real life is more metaphorical than like 18 levels of metaphor that you can try to put on it are. But yeah, I don't know, there's probably people in this room who could better summarize all the impact of Kay and Sam on our community.
Since we're talking about painting specifically, we haven't talked too much about painting. And it's funny because when you asked me to have this conversation with you, I got, I kind of like tensed up a little because I'm always a little nervous when I talk about painting. Like I said earlier, I'm academically trained in art, but in sculpture, and so there's always this rift between like painting and sculpture. You know, painting like easily can go on a wall, you can carry it around. Sculptures are like there's always like no one wants to buy sculptures, too weird, too big, and especially as I got into like new media art and working with video, there was always that talk about painting being dead. And I think there's, like you mentioned, a resurgence now, but why painting, and why I overheard a conversation that you were having with someone earlier, like why realism, like why photorealism specifically within painting? How were you drawn to that, and why do you dedicate your entire practice on it, really?
I'm so not used to talking as much, so I keep being like, well, you should talk for a while.
No.
I mean, there's two reasons, one of which is more philosophical and one of which is more just practical. Yeah. And the practical one is that I really love painting. It's like I painted my first painting, like really trying, not just like I've got some paints, in my senior year of high school, and then my freshman year of college when I was at U of M. The first day we did oil paintings, I was just so happy. Like I don't need, like, you could erase, the paint could flow, you could get different, like just your control, and it wasn't a good painting, but I felt like I was doing it. And just like, you could get like thin paint, you could get very thick paint, you could do impasto, you could do like these like washes. If you messed it up, you could just wipe it off, which was alien to me doing acrylics. And so, I mean, just on a very practical level, I loved oil painting. I loved, like artistically, just the way that light shares form. I like the way that you can see, I mean, you can probably get that from some of the bigger, newer paintings in this room, just the way that you can feel a space or feel somebody's features by the way light hits them and the way it cools as it goes down a cheek or it warms up on the nose, and just, I think that's stuff that I'm never gonna get tired of painting, is I really love depicting people and depicting the way light hits things. I think as far as like figurative, I think some of that is also like I I'm fascinated by the way people's faces are structured. I think like I love eye sockets, not in like a weird way, but just like I think eye sockets are really like complex, emotive spaces on our features, and like aren't really sexualized or like given their due in like a like just interesting, beautiful way. That's I don't know. I just said that on the internet. Eye sockets are great, but I think so. There's like the practical side of like some of the stuff is just because I like it. Like I think that like there's something of like sometimes revolutionary politics is like you have to do this thing that you kind of hate because hating it is half the battle, as opposed to being like maybe you should do something you really love and then like give it to the movement. And so that's I think some of what I'm operating under is like I will make far more paintings than I will flyers, even though flyers take far less time, just because one, they'll be better than the flyers will be. There's my design classes always were like, delete that, stop putting more things in it, delete it. Like I don't have a very good design sense, and I guess you can see clutter might be part of the thing in some of these. But as far as painting goes, I think politically, there is something that I think is very valuable. Like I got the feedback of like, yeah, painting's dead. Why are you like using this kind of like old medium, this bourgeois, like the king has been painted sort of like commemoration. And I think there has been a greater appreciation recently for the idea of using mediums of the powerful to depict the less powerful or the powerless. I think there's a big piece there of like the very act of it being the sort of tool of the rich gives us some weaponry to use back for our own causes. But I think there's also something to the way that oil painting, at least for me politically, like with the project I've sort of been talking about of like memory and connecting with people in the past and the present, it makes people pause. Like if I took a photo of Sam and Kay and put it on the wall, people might be like, oh, cool. Like that's a nice photo, they seem like a good couple. But like 250 hours worth of an oil painting makes people go like, what the hell is happening? Like you just, it pauses you and it makes people look for a second more. And I kind of like the sense of the sort of multiple layers of humanity that come with oil painting. The idea of it being a image, in my case, an image of a person, so an actual human being painted by a person, where you can feel the humanity of the mark making and of the engagement with it, and then it's being seen by a third person, and that sort of in and of itself being this collective experience of memory and of like a moment or of an experience of a person. And I think that is especially in like a very digital, very like reproduced, like we just scroll through hundreds of images of art every day on our phones, some of us that are more addicted than others. And that kind of deadens us, I think, to images. And I think creating oil paintings and creating images of people that are made by human hands as opposed to even human hands on a digital device is a little different. That's why I am really invested in the idea of sort of continuing to oil paint and paint people and paint comrades. I think there was a third part of that I might have had at some point in my notes, but I've gotten lost in how long I've been talking.
Don't worry. No, I was just thinking, thinking about, you were talking about the people you're painting, and, you talked about the humanity that you feel like painting brings to them through the light that your like eye sockets, the kind of like forms that you're bringing out. And even when thinking about that, though, I know that you see artists as workers, and I think that is like a distinction that is separate from not just like a cultural worker either, but just like a worker. And so I'm curious, like, how you see artists and like artists' kind of role in today.
A lot of thoughts on this. We have our cultural worker poster that I'll briefly hold up because I brought it all the way up here. But you can look at it later. But we do political artist meetups at Swords and Plowshares. And part of like those meetups is built around like number one point on the sheet is we are workers. And I think that's really important because in creative spheres, there's a lot of emphasis on individuality and individualism, I think is more accurate. And I think it separates us from other people. It's this idea of like, we're told we're creatives, we're like, I heard the term solopreneurs, and that was viscerally offensive. But like, just this idea of like, what is essentially like we're the special babes who can see reality in a way other people can't. And I think that that is just so demeaning to other people. Like, I don't think I see reality any better or different than other people. I think, like, I had some time and decided to devote a bunch of energy to a skill. I had privileges that let me, like, put money into art school, money into painting. And I've developed a craft, much like anyone else in human history who's developed a craft. And I think that there's specific things that art can do and the role it plays in society that are different than, say, like a cobbler. Like, those are different roles. But I think that there is something, like, I think there's this huge emphasis on leading artists away from other working people and into these spheres where they're the special one who can design the poster for the car event, to speak about what's happening locally. And to act as though that their neighbors couldn't have done that, or that their neighbors were somehow, like, lesser beings. I think that, like, is this weird choice that our society has made. I mean, I guess it fits in with the individuality of our society, but yeah, I think artists are people who have a skill that is being employed by and large rich people. Like, they're doing commissions, they're working for foundations that are funded by rich people and are directed by rich people. They are, most of them, not making money off their art and are just literally working at a totally different job where they're, by any definition, a worker. And there's a sort of sense of, like, if you do art on your weekends, you shouldn't identify as the barista you are the other 5 days of the week, or more often 6 or 7 days if you're a barista. And I just think that that's a political dead end for us as people. I think this idea that we all become individual brands of our careers, because then you can kind of see that happening with different things. I mean, there's the influencer push, there's the idea that, like STEM is going to be this whole separate type of working people that'll be the ones that get to have middle class income as opposed to all other working people. And it's just, as soon as they can, they'll cut those wages too. They will pay you exactly as little as they can get away with. And I think that the only hope for us as artists to actually have, like, a free choice in our medium and a free choice to be able to build the art and the world that we want is if we identify and build with other working people. And so I think, like, both, like, strategically and just very practically, we are workers. Like, our interests are aligned with every other working person. The same people that tell us no and make us do, like, weird commission art projects that we are like, okay, I guess you've got the $1,000 I need. That's the same people who are, like, cutting folks' wages and hours at a different job, and probably our second or third job. So yeah, I wrote quite a bit about that, but I think it's preposterous that artists try to, like, act as though we're the special ones.
Well, and I know we had talked previously, and you were talking about an essay you're writing. I don't know if you want to share some of that, or just, like, new work that you're currently working on.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I try to channel some of the diatribe into things that are productive as opposed to my friends and loved ones, and that's been helpful for them, I think. I have 2 pieces that I've been working on for a while. One is called Ambiguity in an Art World Shaped by Capital, and that one sort of was just published by the Hampton Institute, which is a left-wing group based in Chicago that does, like, kind of more academic style articles. But that looks at the way that sometimes ambiguity is fetishized by the art world, not because it's artistically valid, but because it is easily commodifiable and exchangeable. And that's not to say that ambiguity isn't important or useful in art, but just that the idea that we as artists can just, like, step back and let our art go and let what we pretend is the viewer decide what it means is sort of, I think, a myth. When the gallery picks which art is on the walls, the critic decides and tells people what the art means, the foundation or the rich person buys whichever art they feel is most aligned with their interests. And so, like, you're not really in a conversation with the viewer, you're in a conversation with a market, a wealthy person. And they get to kind of decide what your art means if you just let that ambiguity lie and don't sort of engage in a struggle over what your work means. And as with everything, there's like 7 equivocations, but that's one piece that is actually out. And then the other one that I'm working on doesn't have a title, but it's essentially maybe murals aren't the greatest thing in human history and might have some problematic elements in how they impact our city. And so I'll pare that title and possibly the 3,000 word article down. But that's basically just looking at the way that, kind of echoing those arguments, murals are a wonderful historical art form that has a great tradition of connecting with community, bringing art out of the gallery and into the streets. But in our current setting here in Detroit, there is a lot of money that is sitting behind those murals and is intentionally choosing which murals go up and where, and what is the content of those murals. And you can see a direct correlation between those murals being used to essentially demarcate areas that are going to get a ton of real estate investment or just did, and identify those as areas where other wealthy people should invest their money, where middle class people should buy homes, and then upper middle class people should buy the homes from those people. And you can see it, I think, very clearly in like murals in the market. There were murals in Eastern Market for a long time before there was a big mural competition. Then a mural competition showed up and everyone was very excited, and there was a lot of amazing murals that were made. And then a rich person showed up and bought Eastern Market. And now that same competition has moved to Island View, another area where there is fears of displacement, increasing property values. And this isn't to say that people shouldn't make murals, this isn't to say that murals can't do huge, important things to connect with people. But I think that there's an argument that, as it currently sits, far from escaping the gallery, the logics of the gallery have been externalized to our city. Like, rich people control what goes up on the walls, it's not offensive to them, it fits within their worldview, and the main goal is to increase property values. It's not to create great work, it's not to reflect the struggles and reality of our communities. If it doesn't increase property values, then it's not going on a wall. And that's why they took down the graffiti first. And so yeah, there's a lot more of me being frustrated with that and trying to unpack that. But yeah, that's kind of the big thing that my thoughts have gone into.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have read this already, and I wanted to kind of like pinpoint and I don't know if you want to share it right now, I think it is an important aspect that...
Let's just hope it ever gets published, please.
That the kind of like weight of this does not just rely on the artist, though. You prompt some situations that there could be alternatives, because it's not just about the individual not taking these projects on, because that weight shouldn't fall on them. And could you talk about that a little more?
Good save, so I don't just come off like an asshole. Yeah, no, I think that there's this, again, like to escape sort of an individual framework where it's all about us just doing the right thing as an artist. It's like, yeah, no, these are the market forces. If you want a career right now, a great way to have a career is to paint murals. And I'm not going to begrudge anybody having a career. Yeah. I think if there's no on-ramps and then somebody offers you an on-ramp, please God, take it.
More money, right?
Yeah.
Going back to being a worker,
yeah, like that, and that I think circles back to this idea of like, yeah, you have a skill and you work for the people with money, as does every other worker. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I think like the solutions aren't to just not paint the thing that the person next to you will then paint. It's just try and figure out alternatives. And some of the alternatives I throw out there are this idea of maybe the neighborhood should choose what artistic production they want in their neighborhoods, as opposed to being like, everyone should like murals, and then you show up at a like block club meeting and you're like, would you like some murals in your neighborhood? And everyone says yes. And they're like, see, they love the murals. Well, you could have had a conversation about, did they want a recording studio? Did they want a place to see plays? Did they want maybe like a daycare center that has art on the walls? Like, maybe those are like ways to integrate culture more directly with people's lives and use some of that public money in a way that still reflects and connects with people's culture, but like lets them have a voice in it. Yeah. And I think that like an example of, I'd say a step towards that is definitely like Garage Cultural here in the city, where they have accepted money from some of the same folks that are sending money all around currently. But they've also been very principled about what they show. They're very intentional about showing the history and heritage and pride of the people of the place that they're doing the work on. And it's not just swept of problematic elements. There's working people, there's folks protesting. Like, the tradition of mural like confrontation exists in that work. and they are folks who live in the neighborhood. They're folks who like repeatedly reach out and connect with their neighbors, who are in conversation, who are pushing back against projects they don't think are suitable for their neighborhood. And like, you should look up their work and learn more about it. I will summarize it in a way that doesn't do it justice here, but I think there are these examples of like collective institutions that we could build, and also like public art shouldn't be corporate public art. Like, it shouldn't be a public-private partnership where essentially the corporation that brought the money gets to decide what the art is. If the corporation wants to donate money and give up all creative control, cool, okay, that's like, I'll take that as a form of additional taxes that they wouldn't pay otherwise. But this idea that they get to then have some oversight, or that they might have a problem, like when they start paying for a mural that like points out that DTE shut off 700,000 people's power in the middle of winter, then I'll maybe be okay with them paying for the mural. But like for now, painting a DTE substation seems pretty messed up. Letting them off the hook and giving them the free press seems pretty messed up as a like cultural sphere, and as a city just sort of trying to whitewash some of these things. And yeah, I mean the Gilberts heavily invested in all this. So yeah, I think that there's like, it's about coming together, maybe some sort of picking projects we won't do, like collectively, like not just being like never do murals, but maybe if DTE again leaves a bunch of people without power in the middle of winter, maybe we don't do the DTE mural. And as artists, we come together and we talk about that, we make a point of that. And there's still problematic stuff going on, but that's a step forward. Yeah, I think it's just like, the piece doesn't end with all the solutions, but just sort of, I try to point back towards like collective struggle, and like not just being happy that rich people gave back any of the money that they stole from us and then high-fiving over it.
Yeah. The last point with DTE brings me to my last question, which is, I wanted you to share some resources, or like artists, podcasts, or whatnot, but I'm now giving like a shout out to the political artist meetups that we're both a part of, and the exhibition that we're organizing, which is around the struggle of DTE within the community and kind of like artists responding to that. So can you share some of that and other things you want to share?
Yeah, that was a really good summary. But like, the idea is basically that we're inviting artists to submit 2 pieces. The first piece just represents their work in general, and the second piece responds in some way to the effect that DTE is having on our communities. And we have some trainings. We've worked with the Work For Me DTE Coalition here in Detroit, that folks can it's like an hour. You watch it, you can get some of the basics of the deeper stuff that's going on with energy monopolies. And we expect those to be more responses, not masterpieces, but we're just looking for artists to be able to show like, we do this work over here and we can show up for our communities, and they're both part of our practice together. So anybody who's making work in the city, we'd love to have you submit to that. Please reach out, swordsandplowshares313@gmail.com. And then other stuff, first off, they let me pick like 15 books that I like.
Yeah.
So please buy books and support 27th Letter. But a bunch of those over there are ones that are very near and dear to my heart, and I was surprised when they didn't just say no to some of them. I gave them like a tiered list, and they were just like, we'll get those. And I was like, all of them? And they were like, yeah. So that was a huge list there of like reading that I like. I wrote down a bunch of things. This will not be exhaustive, but I would definitely shout out Left Aesthetic as a person who makes amazing work, very consistently, directly tied to people's struggle. They're Left Aesthetic, that's their title on Instagram. Look them up. They pretty much, if there's a protest, they make a flyer within the next day that publicizes what happened there, and just really incredible practice. They're also involved with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, so they're part of a collective struggle as well as an individual practice. I already shouted out the People's Forum. I think Swords and Plowshares, the Brick and Mortar Collective. Before I list a bunch of art things, the UAW, everyone should be supporting the United Auto Workers in their struggle for our state. I think sometimes we act as though those workers are only fighting for themselves, maybe not people in this room, but that's Michigan getting a huge portion of the wealth that gets taken out of our state back. That money is when an auto worker makes more money, everyone around them is going to make more money. Both because they're raising the wage scale, as well as they're not hoarding that money. They're spending it. They're not Elon Musk putting it in a bank account or an offshore account. That's going right back into their neighbors. And so yeah, the stronger labor is, the better we're all doing. So a huge shout out to the UAW and to SAG-AFTRA and the writers' strike currently ongoing, fighting against the computerization of their jobs and the use of what's called AI, but it's really just theft algorithms, to try to replace, again, humans making art, because for some reason that's the problem with art right now, is that too many humans are making it. But please support both of those ongoing strikes. As far as some like art stuff that I would shout out, artists I like are like Geli Korjev is an amazing socialist realist in, well, he was in the USSR, did figurative work his whole life until the fall of the Soviet Union, and then he made these really weird, grotesque paintings of like monsters having a democracy together, which I think were his reflection on like the democracy that they were offered by capitalism, but just really incredible work that's a very human connection to the experience in the USSR. I always recommend Ben Davis's work as an art critic, as well as John Berger, and I'd also recommend Qintao Wu, who wrote one of my favorite books called, I'm gonna forget it because I got nervous. Commodifying Culture, I believe is what it is, but I probably got that wrong. But it basically looks at the way that public-private partnership has worked to take over most public museums, as well as like kind of how anyone absorbs art. And then locally, I love Sydney Camp's work and Mario Moore's work. I definitely shout out both of them. And then I always recommend Blowback Pod, as I threatened I would. Blowback Podcast basically is a podcast series that looks at the blowback of U.S. interventions around the world and the way in which those things circle back and affect our everyday life, and kind of the way we try to forget about them. So they have a series on like the Korean War, on Cuba, on Iraq, and the most recent one is on Afghanistan. But just the way in which the narrative that we're handed really doesn't fit the reality of the history, and that explains why things seem so random sometimes in the official narrative. And then finally, I would recommend that any artist who's interested in digging in more politically around their work read Mao's talk at the Yan'an Forum. It's an incredible break. Like, get through some of there's propagandistic language through the first bit, but the whole second bit is really just this exploration of like what it means as an artist to enter a community and to do work that supports that community, and to examine like questions of whether we go, who you make work for, like who's your intended audience, whether you're trying to make work that appeals broadly or that deepens your craft and maybe appeals to like folks who are very passionate about like painting, for example, and the contradictions and tensions that arrive there. If you're coming from a petty bourgeois background, if you're coming from like university, how do you interact with a community that hasn't had access to those resources, maybe isn't part of your direct cultural milieu, and how do you like dig into that? And he doesn't answer all those problems, but I think it's a really amazing rundown of just the problems that they were dealing with in like rural China in 1942 seem very relevant to artists today as we try to, like, many of us come back from universities, come back from grad programs, or just make work in spaces that are much more individualized as we try to reach back to a community that built us. Yeah, I would also really briefly, do I have to stop?
I was gonna say, you were talking about Vijay Prashad earlier,
Yes,
and
also,
you always bring up that. Sorry.
I would also shout out Vijay Prashad,
Yeah.
who is a writer, and I think he's the director of the Tricontinental, but he edited the collection in the back there, The East Was Red, but spelled R-E-A-D, about socialist culture in the developing world. Yeah, he's got a lot of non-dogmatic, very innovative thinking around how Marxism and socialism and communism apply to today, and that kind of shared history through time. And yeah, I would also shout out Aiko Fukuchi and their writing, because their writing is highly influential to me. Snaps. They have a piece that is called, I'm going to forget the title because I've forgotten that the whole time, but it's basically about celebrity culture in organizing, and I think that's like 3/4 of the title, is what I just said, but has been highly influential in the way that I think about individuality and individualism in organizing spaces, and Aiko does a lot of amazing writing both in the nonfiction and creative nonfiction spheres. So check out their work.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, everyone. I don't know what time it is, but
my phone's over there.
Yeah, my phone's not with me either. Oh, it's 7:20. Beautiful.
This like perfectly.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to open this up and see if anyone else has questions for Ian. Yeah, I know it's always hard to like prompt it and be like, now ask. But has anyone had any thoughts while Ian is speaking?
I have a question.
Please.
So early on, I think you said if or when Detroit becomes Ann Arbor. Can you expand on that? I was trying to decide if you were saying that was a good thing or a bad thing.
It's a bad thing.
I just wanted to say you were really listening because that was that was really early.
I think Ann Arbor has also changed over time. So I was using that more as a shorthand for large, expensive buildings that no one live in, businesses that no one really asked for, and a population that is that like none of the developers intend to be the one that was living there 10 years ago. I think like if Detroit is allowed to kind of like undergo the process it's already begun and fully push out the populations that have lived here for generations, Black and brown folks who fought for the city and made the city what it is and made our state what it is, if those folks are pushed out to suburbs and essentially out of their communities, and we just let capital turn this into yet another like every other place it wants to turn everything into for some reason, then yeah, I think Michigan becomes a much worse place to live, both for those folks in particular, but also for all of us in general, whether folks want to acknowledge that or not. Go.
Yeah, so I have a question about the portraits of the people, the comrades that you don't know, that you weren't able to photograph yourself or kind of see in person. I think a lot of times these people that are so famous, we associate them with one image, and that kind of contributes to them becoming celebrities and icons, and not knowing who they are just from the work that they've done. So I'm assuming light is a part of your answer, because you mentioned that before, but how do you choose which image you capture, or do you kind of merge that in other images you stand on?
Yeah, I have a Russian roulette wheel, not a Russian roulette wheel, a roulette wheel at home. I just spin it and then I just paint whatever image is on there. But no, it's basically the, I try to pick images that aren't the standard image. I try to find ones that are rarer. I like, as I'm scrolling through Instagram or Facebook, or sometimes I'll get interested in a subject, I just spend a lot of time on Google image searches, and they change the way those searches are done, and so now it's a lot harder to do what I used to do easily. Yeah, looking for images that are more approachable, more, I think like off the cuff, more, that at least to me speak as like a kind of more direct, like, I mean, the Layla Khaled image back there, I didn't take that image, but that isn't her holding the rifle, so like looking down, like, I've done a painting of that image as well, but it's not part of the show. But it kind of speaks to this sort of moment of like a spark of like, that could be my friend, as opposed to like that's a god sort of image. I think that the Joe and Lai painting in the back also, that painting basically came about because I'd never seen an image of him younger than 50 and looking hopeful, as opposed to sort of like dour and committed. And just like that kind of, I feel like I'd felt that moment where like you're in the middle of a protest, or you're like looking out at like a friend, and you kind of do that like half smile, and then you like run off to go and make sure that like the speaker gets back into the car. Like that sort of moment felt very real to me. And so yeah, there's sort of like a cultivating, finding the rare images piece that goes with that, and then like with the a lot of the old ones, there's a huge portion that goes into making them in color, just because they're all black and white. So there's a lot of trying to find skin tone references, folks who are similar age. I do some research into where folks are from, trying to make sure that I get like where specifically in their country they're from, trying to get the right approximation of how they would have looked, and the way like, yeah, skin tones would work. Yeah, is that helpful? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, one more. So, Frantz Fanon, you've read him?
I recommended that book, but they already had it. Or one of his books.
So, his premise apparently is like, okay, the individual actually, when performing violence, basically gives that person agency. I'm curious about how you think about violence.
With the chairman of the board of my Peace Center organization directly in the front row. I think violence is different in different hands. I think for me, there's a lot of equalizing of what violence is that's done in the West, where we kind of go, the violence that happens on both sides of this war is bad, without looking at how that war came about, without looking at whose tanks rolled in first, without looking at like whose production was being stolen for however long.
We don't have any control over that. I'm more interested in, like, here, now, the kind of shit that happened during Black Lives Matter. Like, okay, when you're on the street and you're being kettled, do you fight back or you kneel down with your arms out?
Yeah, I think in that scenario, if you're looking for a straight answer there, I think if you fight back, you get out of the police blockade. Like that's also about making sure everyone else gets home that night. Like that's not just like you're not ending somebody's life there. I don't think that's a very ambiguous situation. You're making sure like 200 people don't go to jail for no reason. And so yeah, I mean, I think my problem with the way violence is treated sometimes and hand wrung over, I think, in the United States is that we remove that historical context and we act as though all violence is equal. And I think that the violence of the oppressed is inherently different than the violence of the oppressor. And I think that's a key part of Fanon's thought. And I don't think that we should celebrate when violence is necessary or when violence is used, but I don't think that, especially sitting here, and especially sitting with my skin tone, I'm going to tell people how and in what way to make sure their community is safe and free. And yeah, like there's tons of different examples where violence was maybe less justified or more justified, and like that's for folks to talk through and maybe to join a political org to debate and develop a line on. But yeah, I think that's my feelings there.
Hi, I got a question. So it sounds like you spent a lot of your career as a youth organizer and or as like a peer-to-peer organizer. It sounds like that was like a really important part of your politicization. Can you share a little bit more like about how you feel about that kind of work now that you're maybe either a different kind of a youth or maybe not as much as a youth? Like what role do you see yourself playing in that kind of work? And like what like role do you hope that like your art and your analysis also plays into supporting that type of education?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you can see a pretty direct connection between like that, the youth work I did, is it youth work when you're also a youth? The organizing I did, there was very, like, we did a lot of political education and we did a lot of like, I mean, we read Fanon, we read Marx, we read like Grace Lee Boggs, like we were trying to make sure folks weren't ungrounded in the way they were approaching these questions. And I think you can see a similar like impulse in the way I'm choosing to paint things and what I'm choosing to paint and how I'm desperately trying to get folks to look at them. And so yeah, I think that like, I think that I have this sense in and maybe this gets back to why I'm really into figurative work, I have this constant sense of the loss that's going on. I think that there's this like, we're losing amazing people every day and we're losing like ground in different ways every day. And there's a lot of things that are slipping through our fingers. And I think that like, I see the paintings and I see like remembering and like holding on to that history and being able to draw that connection between all those people we've lost or all those people that have come before us and the people that are coming after us. Like that kind of makes that worth it in a way, or it makes that struggle real in a way that sometimes history can forget. And so I think that like, yeah, working class people especially, like they're not getting put up on billboards. They might not even get like a tombstone or like a space where somebody could walk by and remember their name. And I think like culture offers us the opportunity to hold on to people and to hold on to history and share it with each other. I think was fundamentally part of my impulse with the Power Network, was this sort of sense of like, I need to, like, I've read a bunch of books and I got a lot of feelings, and the world needs to get better, but I can't do that just by having books and feelings. I gotta organize with some people, and then we gotta all like teach each other the stuff that we all forgot. That was a rambly answer that I think touched on some of what you said, but
Thank you.
thank you.
I think that's a great way to leave this talk. So thank you everyone for coming and for having us all here tonight.
And thank you, Heather.